Hey guys, welcome back to Gardens and Grace. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Tasha, and today I want to talk a little bit about succession planting. I'm out here actually succession planting right now. I'm starting some new seeds, but I want to talk a little bit about succession planting. What is it, why we do it, and honestly how we can do it. Because when I was first starting out as a new gardener, I'd heard the term succession planting quite a lot, and what I found was there were so many things I just didn't know, and in trying to succession plant and seed start, I was seed starting the wrong things at the wrong time, or I was winding up with too many plants or too few plants. And so I just kind of want to talk through some of that. We're not going to cover all of it extensively. So when it comes to succession planting, what it means and what it is really is that you're just going to stagger the planting of your plants. So as you have plants kind of coming into maturity, you have other plants that are coming up behind them. And with succession planting, we do a couple of things, right? If we, like for instance, with my squash plants, I do a lot of succession sowing with squash plants. The reason that I succession sow with squash plants is because squash vine borers and squash bugs in my area are terrible, and they're gonna kill off my squash plants before disease or frost or any of those things. So they're gonna, squash bugs, squash vine borers are gonna really shorten the lifespan of my squash plants. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in another video dealing specifically with squash. Succession planting things like squash, and there's several other things I do that with, I really do in order to deal with pest or disease issues that might shorten the lifespan of my plants. The other reason we would succession sow is just because, like in my area, I'm in zone 8A. So my first frost date is the first week in April, and my last frost date is early to mid-November. So I have a fairly long growing season. I think it actually is mid-November is our last frost date. But so I have a really long growing season. Now, some plants will grow throughout the season just fine, but most plants are going to have a set lifespan, and it's not going to be as long as my growing season. So they're going to kind of peter out before the frost comes. So in order to make sure I'm getting as much harvest as I can throughout the growing season, I will succession sow so that as plants are kind of petering out, kind of dying down, I have new plants to replace them. The other reason we're going to succession sow is for space. Now, I like to grow a lot of what my family eats in a growing season. I have a long growing season, I can do that. Places where you have a shorter growing season, you may not be able to succession plant as much, maybe, or for as long as I can, but you still can usually succession plant, even up into like zone 4, zone 5, zone 3. You're gonna have a shorter window in which your plants grow. But either way, so for me, I want to try to get as much harvest out of the garden as I possibly can. And if I succession plant, what I wind up with is a lot more produce than if I just grew everything all at once. I don't have enough space to grow everything all at one time. It would take a lot more space than what I have. But because I'm succession planting, I can grow, for instance, like bush beans, right? I can grow 3 or 4 plantings of bush beans in my area throughout the growing season. If I was to only plant 1 planting of bush beans, it would need a lot more space than if I planted a planting of bush beans and then planted another planting of bush beans and then planted another planting of bush beans. I could technically use the same space. I often rotate at least a little bit, but technically if you were to use the same garden space and you plant 3 different times, you wind up with more produce than if you were to just try to plant 1 time, obviously. So really I'm maximizing my space by succession planting. The other reason that I succession plant oftentimes for me, I'm a working single mom, okay? So I have a full-time job and I have kids and I have a busy life. I have a busy schedule. So I can't, like if I plant all of my paste tomatoes at one time and I say I'm gonna preserve all the tomatoes we're gonna eat for the whole year, at one time. They're all gonna come in at once. I'm gonna have to harvest everything at one time. I'm gonna have to preserve everything at one time, and I'm gonna have to put everything away at one time. That's not realistic for me. So what I do instead is I will have, you know, my slicer tomatoes growing all throughout the season, and I do succession sow those as well, even though my tomatoes will last and produce for a really long time. They'll really last up until the last frost date, usually. Now, some tomato varieties maybe kind of peter out with diseases in my area tend to be more of an issue. Blight tends to be more of an issue for my tomatoes than pests or anything like that. Tomato hornworms are an issue. Like, I pray I'm not dealing with tomato hornworms this year, but we'll see. But either way, so I will wind up with planting, you know, a couple determinate varieties of tomatoes, paste tomatoes specifically, like your Romas. I'll plant my Romas. I'll plant a big batch of them. They'll all come in at one time. I'll do some preservation. I'll plant another batch of them. They'll come in all at one time. I'll do some preservation. And so by succession sowing, I'm also kind of freeing up my time throughout the growing season. And so what I wind up with, instead of one big massive harvest, is several smaller harvests when it comes to something like a determinate variety tomato. Now, my indeterminate variety tomatoes are going to produce all throughout the season. I talk about that in a lot of videos. For a lot of people, and especially if you have a lot of space, you may say, you know what, I want to do one harvest and get it all done. Well, then succession planting may not be as necessary for you, at least not for those reasons. You may still want to do it for things like your squash, because of squash bugs and because of vine borers, things like that. So for pest pressure, you may still want to succession sow. But when it comes to, you know, staggering your harvest, you may not want to do that. That's perfectly okay. So how we succession plant really depends on so many different variables, and what that's going to look like in your area is going to be different than what it looks like in my backyard. But I'm going to kind of give you some of the principles I go by. So I will start the season off with a planting. You know, I start things in seed trays so that I can save space in my actual garden. I'm starting in the next round right now of tomatoes and squash. I think it's really just tomatoes and squash. I'm starting tomatoes and squash I'm seed starting tomatoes and squash, and I'm going to utilize this space because my garden space is currently taken up. But what I'll do is the minute that something is ready to be harvested or pulled from the garden, I've got something else seed started that can go in place of whatever I'm harvesting. By doing that, not only am I maximizing my space, but I'm also growing things in containers so that they've already got a jump start on their maturity before I put them in the ground. And so there's going to be less time that I have to wait in between harvests by doing it this way. So that's a principle that I apply oftentimes with seed starting whatever I can. Now there are things like my bush beans. Bush beans, I do not normally start in, as transplants and transplant out in the garden. I normally direct seed these because they're going to grow so fast. And the minute that the bush bean emerges from the soil, it's already going to be quite large, and it's going to grow and it's going to mature really fast. So I don't see any point in wasting seed starting mix or space in my seed trays to start bush beans. I will directly plant those into the ground. So if I move something out of the garden, you guys can see my dog probably in the window. She's really sad right now because she wants to come out. Because I'm out here, and she thinks that whatever I'm doing, she's supposed to be right there. So don't mind sad eyes in the window. She's gonna be fine. I'm gonna take her out as soon as this video is done so that I can actually play with her, versus being, talking to you guys. She would never let me sit here and talk calmly. She would never be calm while I sat here and talked to you guys. So don't mind sad eyes in the background. I promise she is well loved and taken care of. But bush beans, when I seed start these, I can pull something out of the garden, put bush beans, plant them right behind it, and I know, like for instance, this variety, it's 58 days to maturity. A lot of mine, bush beans are 45 days or so to maturity. So, and because I have such a long growing season, I'm not gonna worry about that time as much. The other reason why I really succession plant and I really advocate succession planting is because when we do deal with a pest or disease issue, I know I kind of already talked about this when we have a pest or disease issue, but when we do have a pest or disease issue, oftentimes we will put a lot of effort and a lot of energy in trying to save a dying plant, when really it would be much easier and more economical, and we would have a better harvest if we just replace it with a healthy plant. So for me, it winds up making more sense most of the time. If I have a plant that's really struggling, I may try to bring it back. After attempt 1, I'm going to cut my losses and I'm going to put a new plant in its place, so that space is getting utilized and I'm able to grow food in that space. So a question I get asked a lot when it comes to planting things in our garden, whether we're succession sowing or not, is crop rotation. There are a lot of people who swear that we have to continuously rotate our crops for the health of our soil. Now, in big ag, in big farm, that is absolutely true. On a small scale, as a small scale gardener, that's not always the case. When I encounter things like a squash vine borer in the soil, or I encounter blight in the soil, I will rotate my crops the next season or the next planting. I'm not going to plant the same thing there because I know that there's already an issue in the soil, that the planting that I'm putting there is already going to be contaminated. So from that perspective, I will rotate my crops, or in those cases, I will rotate my crops and the things that I plant. But generally speaking, if your plants are healthy and you're amending your soil with fertilizer and compost and you're caring for your soil and your plants are healthy, there's really no need to rotate your crops. There's just really no need for that. In big ag and big farm, we definitely want to do it because we're doing rows and rows and rows of the same crop, and it's stripping the nutrients from the soil, and just the practices of big farm, the chemicals and things like that. Yeah, we're gonna want to rotate when it comes to big farm, big ag. In a small scale gardener setting in your backyard, you're not gonna need to. Like I said, with the exception of whatever your plants have dealt with that season, and you probably don't want to put the same type of crop in that planting, or as a crop that's susceptible to whatever issues you've dealt with, whether that be pest or disease. So something to keep in mind when it comes to succession planting. Now, how often do we succession sow? That's another question that I get asked quite often. And that really does vary on your planting. So I know that bush beans, well, I'm not gonna use this example. So I know something like the geranium kiss dwarf tomato, I know that this guy's not gonna produce all season long, right? It's gonna have a flush of tomatoes and it's pretty much gonna be done. So in that, let's see, it's 65 days to maturity. So a lot of times what I'll do, something like this, if I know that I'm gonna have one big flush that I get to harvest and it's gonna kind of peter out after that, what I'll do is I'll start these, and about 3 to 4 weeks after I start these, I'm gonna start some more tomatoes, some more dwarf tomatoes, and I'm gonna let them grow in containers because they can grow in here for up to 8 weeks and be just fine. Add in a water-soluble fertilizer, and about the point that I'm ready to pull these guys out of the ground, I have another planting that's ready to go in, and I get another flush of them. So that's one way to do it. Now there's, like I said, there's so many other things that come with this, and trying to give all the information in this one video isn't gonna be realistic or practical. But if we were doing something like a root crop, obviously we're not going to plant a root crop from seed in a transplant tray. What we're gonna do is let the root crop come to maturity. Once we pull it out, we're gonna put another seed in the ground, wait for that root crop to come to maturity. The other thing to be mindful of is your cool weather crops versus your warm weather crops, knowing where you're at in your season. And so for me in my area, I really struggle. It sounds crazy because I know a lot of people who can grow, turnips in the summer in the heat. I cannot grow turnips in the heat for anything. Like, it just does not work. So I know I'm gonna have maybe 2 spring plantings and maybe 2 fall plantings of my purple top turnips. So I'm gonna realize that, hey, after my based on the days of maturity, I'm gonna realize that however long this crop takes to mature, where are we gonna be at when this crop is ready to be harvested? And so we don't want to plant something that's meant for the cool weather time and it have to grow through the heat of the summer, right? So because of that, I know if it's coming into maturity as it begins to get hot, that's okay. But trying to grow it in 90-degree weather from starting it from seed, that's not going to work. It's not going to be feasible. I'm not going to get a harvest from that. So I'm just wasting valuable garden space. So a lot of those tricks you'll learn. Looking at the back of your seed packets, knowing your, and that's just a good practice anyway. Know your spacing, knowing how things grow, knowing the days to maturity. All of those are important as you're getting started. Some of that you're going to learn through trial and error. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, if you're someone who just wants the end result and the goal, gardening is one of those things that oftentimes is trial and error, and it's oftentimes a learning experience more than it is anything. And so I can give you a lot of information about what I do in my garden, and I will. And throughout the season, I'll take you through my garden and I'll show you what's working for me, what doesn't work for me, pitfalls you might be able to avoid, and successes I've had and things of that nature. But what works in my area may not work in your area. What works in my backyard may not work in your backyard. All of those things are true. Something that doesn't work in my backyard might work very well in yours. So keeping all of that in mind, just realize that succession planting, especially if you have a small amount of space, is a really good way to get a lot of food throughout your growing season. Keep your plants healthy, manage pest and disease issues, or mitigate pest and disease issues. So I hope this has really blessed you. I hope you've learned something. I have not done anything when it comes to seed starting right now because I was busy talking to you, but I felt this information was more important to talk about. And so I'm gonna plant my tomatoes, seed start some tomatoes and some squash and get those started. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in my garden today. May your garden be full of grace and may you be abundantly blessed. We'll see you next time. Bye.